Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello, and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and this is the podcast where we talk about leadership, presentation skills, communication challenges, and so much more. Before I get to my wonderful guest today, I'd like to invite you to see where your presentation skills are by taking our free 4-minute quiz at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's www.speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where you can see where your presentation skills are helping you and where perhaps a little bit of support could help you get the results you need and the recognition that you deserve. My guest today is another presentation skills trainer who comes from a slightly different background, Hilary Blair. And we had a good time talking shop a little bit about how to make people really show up as great leaders. Her official bio is Hilary Blair is a keynote speaker, champion of human connection, and the CEO of Articulate Real&Clear. She's impassioned by moving beyond habits and learned behaviors to uncover what's unique and authentic in individuals and groups. She's a presentation skills and a speaking voice expert. Hilary's a highly regarded coach and facilitator, working extensively across the globe with a variety of businesses, including Maersk Shipping, Liberty, Global Slalom, and the American Civil Liberties Union. Whether facilitating workshops on professional presence, coaching tough conversations to improve leadership and team connection, or exploring the messiness of communication as a keynote speaker, Hilary's 30-plus years as a teacher, combined with her professional stage and film and voiceover career, present a unique skill set. She's certified in conversational intelligence and culture talk, holds a Master of Fine Arts in Acting from the National Theatre Conservatory and a bachelor's from Yale University, and she has a history playing a tomato plant. Wait till you hear that story. On to the interview with the wonderful Hilary Blair. Hilary Blair, welcome to Speakers Who Get Results.
Thank you.
I'm so glad to have you here. It's just always talking to somebody who has turned their art into business. And I think a lot about the relationship between art and business. But before I go into my whole list of questions I have for you, yes, let me ask you, who would be your dream interview? If you could interview someone who's no longer with us, who would it be? What would you ask them? And who should be listening?
Wow. What came to mind when you said that is, this is odd, and I'm not odd. It's fantastic. Harriet Tubman came to mind. For me, it's like I had Betty White and Harriet Tubman come to mind. How do you like that? Two people not living. They couldn't be more different. For me, though,
and for our international listeners, define who Harriet Tubman was.
Oh, so Underground Railroad in the U.S., making sure that slaves went safely.
A Black woman who escaped from slavery and then turned around and brought many other Black people out of the slave parts of the South.
Yep.
The U.S. South.
At that time. Yeah. And
at that time.
I'm just amazed at bravery. Let me just put that. So I'm amazed when people think beyond themselves and outside of themselves and step forward and risk everything. So there's so many people who could be in this category. And I think as a child learning history, I was so struck by her. That's why I think she came to mind right away. Mm-hmm. And she she was all about others and making sure that they were safely allowed to have lives and moved people north. And so I feel like there's a full beingness connected to her that has a youthful thing that I was in awe of that. And I realized when you asked me that and said, who would you want to interview from the past, jumped in. And Betty White's very different. And I'm very aware that she spoke out when a lot of other people didn't. And
Betty White, the actor who,
yes, Betty White, the actor. Yeah.
Yes.
And recently passed. So there was a comedic side to her that we saw, right, as a comedic actor and doing all of this. And then you realize this whole side of her where she just boldly spoke up for many different social justice issues and things going on that needed someone with that public view to speak and share their voice. So sharing your voice can show up in actions and in words, in both.
I love that because another thought is when Betty White started speaking up later in life, after she was this, probably as a 20-year-old actress, along with all the other blondes trying to make a living. Yeah. Good for her that she made a living and good for her that she kept on going. It wasn't until she was older that she was really celebrated and then and showed that she wasn't just the dumb blonde, which was the character she often played, but being able to speak up. Often I find at a certain point as women, we get to the point where we just say, to hell with it. I don't care anymore. I'm just going to say what I think. Right. Tired of fitting in.
Yeah.
So, Hilary, I have a lot of things to ask you about voice and executive presence and leadership, but I don't often get other former performers. I don't often get other performers that I can interview. I'm just curious how you got to what you're doing now from a previous life of being a teacher and a performer.
Right. Definitely was in the land of what we call arts for art's sake. So teaching other artists and for the artist world. And it's important to know that I had the classic artist chip on my shoulder against anything to do with business.
I did too.
So, right. Yeah. Money grubbing humans, right? So that idea, I was spotted by someone who saw what I didn't see in the work that I was doing. I was in a play, a children's play, three-hander, a really great three-hander, meaning three characters, and called Tomato Plant Girl. And I was playing Tomato Plant Girl.
Tomato plant girl.
Yes, tomato plant, like a tomato plant. So I grew from a tiny little plant to a large plant to a tomato, to a giant tomato. And the other two characters were bossy best friend and little girl. So it was about friendship and bullying and things like that. And I was a tomato plant, so I didn't have a lot of lines. I had a lot of connection to the other two and relationship building and all of that, not necessarily through words. Some words towards the end as I learned to speak. And I was in line after, and I was shaking little hands. So I'm leaning down as a giant tomato, shaking hands, and this adult body comes in front of me. I can feel them here. I hear this voice, and she asks me, do you work with business people? And in my head, I'm like, I am a tomato at the moment. And out loud, I said, some, kind of squeaked out in the typical tight voice, not breathing answer. Some. She tucked her business card in my tomato costume and said, call me when you've worked with more. At this point, I had been teaching for decades already. And I had some business people come through, not many. When I went back to the theater where I was teaching classes, and I started getting phone calls that were like, do you work with business people? And I said, yes, I do. And so for 5 months, I practiced. I learned many things about business people and how to connect what I did as an acting teacher, drama teacher, theater teacher, and as a performer myself to business people. First thing is, you do not ask a business person to lie down on the floor and breathe, just FYI. You don't
Okay.
start there. So most acting classes start with everyone spread out on the floor, breathing, finding their breath, grounding themselves. So other than that,
Mm-hmm.
so many things that worked. She had a vision of a tomato working with business people. I leaned into that. I believed in that, found all the connections, called her 5 months later. She invited me to New York. I auditioned for her. That's my word. I auditioned for her program called Count Me In for Women's
Mm-hmm.
Economic Independence, in a program which was Make Mine a Million. And the idea was that women were pitching their businesses and then getting awarded if they won, and they were in cohorts. And she saw a tomato and thought I should help women on their story and their pitches. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I did for the next 7 years, is I crisscrossed the country, coaching women entrepreneurs on their voice, on their stories, on being succinct in their messaging, and sharing their passion. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where I chipped away at the rock on my shoulder, fell madly in love with business people, and recognized that business people are passionate and driven. They also track and measure. And most
Yes.
artists would benefit
Artists
from that.
often don't do that.
Yeah.
That's correct.
So what's good about that woman, for me, what's really cool about her for all of us, is she's the woman who co-founded Take Our Daughters to Work Day.
Oh,
So
wow.
she is a visionary.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel called to all of us to remind us to be visionaries for each other and see what we can be that we might not be able to see. Because she saw what I could be and where I've gone far before I did. And I don't think I would have even ended up there had she not suggested it.
I love that. And coming from a tomato plant, that's a great story. Yes. Yeah. Good. I often say that my career started as a bunny rabbit. So, yeah, but I was 5. So I was.
And I was, 25, 28, something like that.
Yes. Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, what got me going was applause. And I realizing that significance is one of the basic human needs, knowing that you're making a difference. And there's no drug as addictive as applause, having people love you for that. So the fact that my mom said that I was the best goddamn bunny rabbit ever to grace the stage of the Hillside School, I said, got me started on a lifelong journey. So I love it. Hilary, you have so many wonderful things to say about leveraging what you learned as a performer and a teacher for business leaders with leadership presence, especially using the voice.
Right.
I'd like to hear more about that and what you're doing.
Sure. There are so many angles where we interfere with ourselves and where we cut ourselves off, where we put up a wall, where we don't connect with other people. And I have found the speaking voice to be a great self-awareness, litmus test, what's going on. And the key part of that would be breath. Because the breath is the first thing that our body holds in protecting us. And most of the time in leadership positions, we are not in quote unquote safer situations. We're in business meetings, we're talking to clients, we're having tough conversations with employees or direct reports, and we are in all of these troubling situations. And instinctively, our body holds. And the key place, even if you look like you're hanging out okay, is the breath. And my big thing is we want to get that breath flowing again so the voice can be connected so that we have that relationship happening. But we can't slam ourselves. We create habits to succeed, not sabotage ourselves. So our bodies are holding the breath to keep us safe. We're not holding our breath to sound funny or not connect or whatever those things are going on. So first saying, thanks, got it. I'm not in a safe place. And I've still chosen to be this leader and I have to have this conversation. I have to give this presentation. That mindset, I find a lot of mindset adjustments are important in the affirmative side versus slamming ourselves. We're really good at being hard on ourselves. Oh, I'm doing that thing again. Oh, that's happening. And I invite people to say, thanks, you're right. And I'm going to override that and I'm going to breathe and be present with this person, even though it's uncomfortable, even though it's a tricky situation. And then when we allow the breath to flow, our voice has a fullness to it that people respond to. When I ask folks, think of someone calling you on the phone. If you have a friend who calls and you ask them, how are they? And they go, good, fine. Why? Your first question, if they're a good friend, is, what's wrong? What's going on? No, I'm fine. Everything's good. So we connect to voices. And when we're on the phone, we've isolated seeing the visual and all of that. When it's a close friend, we know instinctively what to ask. That's happening in every leadership position, in every presentation position. We're not necessarily paying attention to it. We want to pay attention to it in others, and we want to pay attention to it in ourselves. So that held breath, that person who's not sharing, I'm good, really, I'm fine, is all consonants. So consonants tend to carry the intellectual content. Vowels tend to carry the emotional content. And we need a nice balance of both of them. So if someone said, yeah, I'm good, then you're like, oh, okay. Because that's the vowel and consonants together. Leaders, business people, tend to default to the consonants, not necessarily because things are bad in their world, but because we have attached professionalism to only sharing facts and not sharing our whole being. Recognizing that people respond to a whole being showing up, we need breath flowing. Our voice rides on the exhale. That's how we speak. Yep. We have air from our lungs, comes through our vocal folds, shaped into voice. The minute it gets interfered with in any point, it changes the message, changes how much of us is being shared. Inviting business people to have presence by showing up with their full voice is risky, feels super uncomfortable, and we invite people to rock their awkward because people respond to that whole being showing up. And there's more to it, but that idea of we hold our breath to protect ourselves, and when our breath is flowing, our full voice shows up. And vowels is one of those little things that's an indicator to us if we've gone to just the consonants. Yeah, kind of the police officer, the facts and the facts only, ma'am, right?
Yes.
No other content.
I love that. So that with your leadership presence, how does that coordinate with how you stand or sit? You know, we're both sitting for this interview, but how you show up in the room. Because that's a huge part of the work that I do is helping people show up as leaders. And part of that is how do you show up physically in your body?
So I'm perching right now. So I think if we zip to the other camera angle just for a minute, you can see that I'm perched. And I do invite people to perch. So I'm perched on a stool, all right, that's right here. And so I have an upright energy. And I invite people, if they need to be seated, to perch. So if they're on a chair, like in an office, we have those beautifully ergonomic chairs that are designed for boardrooms. I invite people to come to the front of the chair so the back is behind. Yes, like there's a space, and to sit upright and come forward, not leaning forward. There's a really big difference between leaning in and being forward and open. So the leaning in can have that feeling of coming at someone, but simply being forward and open and connected to that, being present and being seen, is often in the shoulders. We don't even realize we're closing off. And this is all the people I work with. It's not gender specific. A lot of things people connect to gender specific, and I have found them to be across gender. They're interpreted differently in different people, but they are.
That's true.
Doing them, and they send different stories. So when we close off slightly, there's a difference between here and here, here and here. Tiny difference. So when people talk about posture, they're often thinking here and like here.
So, and for those who are listening, audience, she's hunching her shoulders forward and back
just a little bit. Yeah. So it's only a tiny bit of a difference in my shoulders from being a tiny bit closed and a tiny bit more open versus being fully. Often when we talk about bad posture, we go to an extreme version of it with our body closed off. And then we go open up. We have people throwing their shoulders back in this odd way. Those two examples for me are where we disconnect with business people, because I feel like when we ask them to have good posture, if we're not clear, they go to that extreme version and then they shut down about it. Versus inviting the subtle difference of voice, allowing the breath to flow, the subtle difference of being open, the subtle difference of sitting forward in your chair and sitting upright versus sitting back and kicking your leg. This kind of thing, generally, we think, I'm doing this so I look relaxed. I'm doing this so I'm inviting you to speak. Counterintuitively, doesn't land that way, right?
Uh-huh.
This lands as more open.
Uh-huh.
And we're inviting the leaders that I work with to re-examine, to look at perhaps the counterintuitive way that they're like, oh, I didn't think about that. I thought that would open up. This actually is more open. So if I want to be seen and want to invite people to be seen, we step forward with that risk and that openness, both vocally, breath. So this helps the breath, and body-wise.
Yes, right. And of course, if your shoulders are open and you're standing up straight, then you have a better column of air, access to a better column of air. And thinking about this, how do you manage this in our Zoom meetings? So I'm sitting at a desk in front of a green screen. You're actually in a studio, which is a great treat. How do you manage that when you only have a box from the shoulder up?
Yes. The first thing is to remember that even with a box from the shoulders up, that we can feel whether you are upright. We can feel your breath. Even if you have your camera off, even with your voice, we can hear if it's connected. That story that is portrayed in a box, honoring that. We've been watching stories in boxes for a long time. So we know what does and doesn't work. So we know from watching television shows, from watching movies, that there's a whole story here. And we can often even tell whether someone's hands are in their lap or if they're actually on the table in front of them, open and connected. So sitting forward, you have that framing, which they invite that framing, right? Which is the either shoulders up. Sometimes you can go, I'm more in the waist up in this bigger shot. In the tighter shot, I am from the same as you, that kind of shoulder area up. And some people even stand on Zoom because they have more energy.
Yes.
You have to have a different setup, either a standing desk or lots of boxes and putting your camera up. And the main thing is making
5
sure
cookbooks seems to be the for a long time. It was 5 cookbooks could get my laptop up to eye level. I now have something that travels with me that's not quite as heavy, but yes, was 5 for many years. It was 5 cookbooks.
Yeah, during the pandemic, I was like, you must have an Amazon box somewhere, right? So
yes, exactly. I'm curious about the challenges you find, and you have mentioned the too much club. Tell us more about that and where you see it, how you notice it.
Sure.
And what to do about it.
Yeah, the too much club. And I'm also thinking about just going back for just a moment and then the too much, the standing. I also want us to recognize that standing is actually physically standing, or for all of the, and you know this too, for all differently abled and where we are, there's sometimes an assumed energy of what we mean by that. So that idea of standing, whatever it is that energizes us to connect more, right?
Yes.
And to whatever situation we're in, even if we're talking in the car, right? Or even if because that happens a lot, or even if we are in a wheelchair, whatever it might be, it's that energy of being connected. And I've heard you mention that a number of times, Elizabeth, that energy is the important thing of connecting.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
The too much is where it can show up. So I have found people, even if what we've been talking about already, Elizabeth, right? Showing up, where are you, right? Is that sense of too much club. Oh yeah, Mark, thanks. We were just in a webinar. So here we are with some too much coming up. So the idea of the too much club is that if I'm inviting you to be open, if Elizabeth is saying to you, show up, we want all of you. There's part of us that's like, right? Because most of us have been told we're too much of something and we're countering it. And most of us have been told often opposing things. So some of us too quiet, some of us too loud.
Yes.
Some of us have been told we are too pushy. Some of us have been told we're too dismissive or receding or whatever. So when we're told we're too much of something, then we change our behavior, our communication, in order to not be too much, in order to take care of the other person. That is the key part of this. We are taking care of the other person by trying to change the feedback that we've gotten that we're too much. And by trying to change our behavior to not be too much, we betray ourselves, we give up on ourselves, and then we get misread. So what happens is I can see people who are disappearing a bit. And I asked them, I said, have you been told you're too loud or too much or too pushy? Yeah, I have. And I said, right. So you're countering that in order to take care of the audience, take care of the person. That feedback is in your head somewhere. What's happening is now we see you as this person who's pulling back and you're not being fully yourself. So there's a misalignment, which starts to betray trust. If you're not fully showing up as you, we're like, wait a minute, we're getting a mixed message here. This doesn't feel quite who this person is. And again, on that gender thing, women are often misunderstood to be incompetent or not knowing what they're talking about and all those things. If they try to adjust what they're doing and not be too much, they're told not to intimidate people, or they think they don't want to intimidate people. And that's true with men as well. And that's binary, I realize. So in the whole continuum of people,
yes.
Right?
Yes, right.
That sense of we don't want to intimidate. Studies have shown that it's actually that people are intimidated. You don't intimidate them. So to show up as your full self and create space for them, instead of trying to limit yourself, invites that person into the full space as well. When I work with leaders, I was working with a guy just the other day, and I'm like, I want you to show up with all that. He's tall, he's big. I want you to hold that space as a tall, big leader and invite people into that, which is far more his personality as well, versus kicking back to give space. Stay here.
There's a bit of a too much that is too much. Yesterday, I was at an event where it was a discussion, and one of the participants was a guy who was louder than everybody else and who kept saying, "You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong." And if my employees can't take it, well, then they leave. And I thought, well, I'm not sure I would want to work with that person who's shouting all the time.
Yes.
So if that's his real self, where do you find the balance? Because for me as a listener, I would want him to accommodate me rather than coming off so loud and dictatorial. I interpreted it as dictatorial. So that's the other side of that.
I don't know this person. So my feeling is that he's been told he's too much of something, and he's been told he's too loud or too what, and he's like, I still need to be heard. So what I see is someone overcompensating for not being heard, not understanding, be too much. Sometimes I feel like some guys are being told not to be guys in the space too, like too much, right? Too much of them. And it's showing up that way. Just like if someone is told that they are so I was working with a young woman and I was like, what's going on? I was told I was a bulldozer. So her behavior, she chose to go the other direction and gave up being strong. And then she was too much. She was too timid. She wasn't there. Her voice was off. She was choosing to go the other direction. It also was too much, that direction. Instead of what I often say is a lot. So if this guy is showing up that way, I'm assuming it's in reaction to not feeling heard, not understanding, not like I got to get them to do what they're doing. So and this is totally my
without knowing him, but it is a type we've seen.
Analysis.
Yes, right.
Yeah, and I hear you completely and agree with you. He is being too much. He's being too loud, too pushy, too prescriptive, and it is shutting people down.
Right.
If we go behind that, if I were working with him, I would say, hey, there's a lot of two coming up. What have you been told? Or what are you think you're being told, and what's your behavior responding to. He might be truly a leader who's bombastic.
Yeah.
He might be there.
I thought of it as so he runs a construction company.
Yeah.
And so he's used to shouting in a space without a fit. And this was a quiet boardroom.
Yeah.
With a bunch of people in suits. So it was an interesting, this makes me think, as I always go back to strategic empathy, my technique of strategic empathy, which is put yourself in the shoes of your listeners who you're presenting to choose a language and a style that they will hear. You don't want to completely blend, but you also don't want to scare them or push them back. I was curious about, I've often thought adapting your style and your language to your listeners.
Totally.
It's different from what you're saying about don't change yourself.
Okay.
So, because don't change yourself is not the same. So don't change, stand up for who you are. And you still need to speak a language they can hear.
Great.
I think of it in terms of language. If you're using the same words, but it's a different language, you still have to speak in a manner that they can take in.
Let me clarify, because words create worlds, right? So when I hear don't change yourself, definitely not feeling that, because I feel like the too much club is what we do. We do change ourselves. It's to be aware that we might be countering something, which is where our strength is or our superpower. Not change ourselves, but be aware of a reflexive flip switch. And we need to style shift all the time for our audience. And we style shift. And when people say, then I'm not being authentic, I'm like, really? You only have one gear? We're multifaceted human beings. We have multiple ways of being authentic. If he's gotten used to being like, and he also, when I hear people shouting or being louder, I often check first, like, do you have a hearing? Is there a hearing issue? And especially if he's been in construction, right? That there might be something that he might not realize he's that loud. He's calibrated incorrectly. I'm totally with you on, we have to shift for our audience. And we might be coming at it from a slightly different angle or different coaching situations. Not even necessarily different styles, but like, oh, that's a different question or coming from a different angle, right? So I totally hear you on that. He was misreading his audience and misreading his tactic, I would assume, right? He's using a tactic that wasn't working at all.
Yeah.
He might have limited tools, ironically, for a construction guy. I often put the little tool chest right here, right? So I know what you do for sure is you're giving people more tools. He is limited. So if, I sometimes joke, sometimes we just seem to have a spork, right? And that's all we have. We're trying to use the spork for everything.
For international listeners, that's a spoon and fork together. It's a spoon with the fork tines.
Yeah, that often they put because they don't know what you're going to get to eat. And so that sense of, if he doesn't have enough tools, including the self-awareness piece, there can be a sense of flailing or feeling lost and going harder at the thing that has worked. Yeah. So if he's been in construction, that has worked for him. Like, he wouldn't choose to do something that hadn't worked, but we can watch him going, okay, wrong tool for the job.
Got it. Yes.
Right. So it's more, and I'm totally on board with you. Wrong tools, wrong situation, not landing
just
well. And it sounds
putting
like
yourself in the shoes of your audience.
Yeah.
And say, how can they hear this?
Yep.
Because if you address them in a language they don't understand, they're not going to listen. They're going to shut down. And then you've wasted everybody. Then everybody's time has been wasted. So,
and how do you find that style shift that's still you? And you have lots to choose from.
Right.
You have so many ways to show up. Yep.
I love it. Hilary Blair, this has been such a delight. I could talk to you for hours about this. We probably have to get together one of these days and have a good constructive argument about all of this.
That's good.
It would be fun.
I love that friction to have some, talk about things. Could
you give us one place to start? Leave us with one place to start for the people who are listening to say, "Oh my God, she's talking about me."
The first place to start is to exhale. So many of us are told to inhale or taught. I used to teach that too. My first thing would be exhale, which we do instinctively, and then allow your body to reset. So we're designed as a vacuum. So the minute you exhale, it's the pause we need to think. When you exhale, the air comes in and we get the oxygen in our bloodstream. And it's the first place to recognize that counterintuitively, we hold our breath. And it's the place to release that, to allow that. And at the end of an exhale is a built-in pause in the human being till you need oxygen. So it's a built-in way to have a pause.
I love it.
Allow the air back in to connect.
I love it. This is wonderful. Hilary, thank you so much for being a guest on Speakers Who Get Results. If you enjoyed this, dear listeners, dear readers, dear watchers, if you enjoyed this, please tell your friends, spread the news so that we can get more listeners to brilliant guests like Hilary. So you can subscribe to us on YouTube, subscribe to us wherever you are, whatever podcast app you're listening to. And please, if you get a chance, leave us a good review on Apple Podcasts. That's the one that's visible. So that's the one where we need more followers. This has been Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman. I'll see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes, and thanks for tuning in.